Hello and welcome to the Migraine Diaries, usually a week-by-week account of the making of my game Scotoma and an unsettlingly consistent way to live my life. This week though, I'm going to go over my recent trip to EGX Rezzed 2018. I went there armed only with poor quality sandwiches, cigarettes and a slight limp from when a giant man stood on my foot on the tube. Putting aside the fact that the map has clearly been put together by a maniac, Tobacco Dock is actually pretty awesome as a venue. I got pretty lost, though not in awe, just because of the shite map. On a side note, it was kind of weird to see Argos there, considering that's a place I mostly associate with shit headphones that I buy when there's no other option, and flat pack furniture that collapses every time you sneeze within 3 feet of it. But the main thing that immediately occurred to me is how much indie stuff was around. Just look at the size of the main indie room. Then there was the indie basement, the left field collection, the rock paper shotgun zone, the list goes on. It was crazy. We're minnows in a vast ocean, my friends. So I trundled around for a couple of days and saw some really interesting games, and here's a few of them. First up was Unbelt, which is German for environment or surroundings. See, I can use Wikipedia too. It's a kind of a first-person puzzle game where you quite literally sort of plug different filters into your brain to allow you to view your surroundings in different ways. It could be red filter, green filter, blue filter, and certain things will show up, like on a painting there'll be sort of part of a code for a door you need to unlock. And the developer told me you're essentially equipping yourself with different senses that the human body has that you're lacking at that point. And it seems like a title with a lot of potential to me, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. Next up is Elysium, which is it describes itself as a kind of a simulation of a hypnagogic state, which is the point just before you go to sleep. And as such, it's kind of a strange sort of grainy experience where there's kind of sort of swirls of shadow and light. And I must admit, I never fully figured out what I had to do, but I spent quite a long time with it. And I believe it's just around to download. So it's a really interesting experience. It's worth trying. I like these games which can be interpreted a number of ways. So yeah, check it out. Next we have Morecre, which is a puzzle game that plays with light and shadow, in the sense that shadow is deadly to you, while obviously light isn't. And you're this small character pushing around this giant orb of light as you try and make your way through the landscape and solve puzzles. And it does some really interesting things with this idea. For example, at one point a tentacle suddenly comes out of the shadows and grabs the ball of light and tries to make off with it. And so obviously you have to pursue it while still staying in the light and avoiding obstacles. And it's a beautiful game. I love games that play with high contrast, and it just looked very polished, and it's something I'm definitely going to be interested in when it's finally complete. Next up, Disco Elysium, a point and click detective game which right from the off had a huge amount of character to it. You play as a cop who's just woken up in a hotel room which has been smashed to pieces, and you've just got to find out what the hell's going on. And there's quite a lot of text in it, which I gather was worked on by 7 writers, so there's a huge amount of writing in it, and all of it is sort of funny and charming, and got a lot of black humour to it, and it looks fantastic, and it's clearly, really well polished even at this stage, even though it's still got some time to go in development. And it's worth wish listing it on Steam, because then you've got updates as to how it progresses. But once again, I love a narrative game, love point and click games, so I'm in. Next up was Vaccination. It was kind of a co-op sort of surgery game almost, with a couple of custom controllers. And while one player was navigating around on the screen, they'd be telling the other person, who literally has like a model of the human body, much like the board game Operation, and they would essentially, I suppose, administer vaccines. It was one game I actually didn't get the chance to sit down with, because every time I went back to the rock, paper, shotgun zone where it was, there were always people on it. But I just thought it was such a cool idea, and yeah, no wonder there were always people on it. It was such an kind of, yeah, well implemented, attractive, fun game. Next up, regular human basketball, which was a real winner to me. I didn't see anyone who wasn't having fun with this game. If you take Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, where several different player-controlled characters have to work together to man a battle station, in this case, you were essentially manning... I suppose they looked a little bit like AT-ATs. And the idea was to use the various means you had at your disposal, such as rockets to give you a lift, or magnets to help pick up the basketball of the title. You had to kind of struggle your way towards the opposite end of the court, as it were, and jump up, score a basket. But obviously you have an opposing player controlled by a couple of other people, and it was just the most... It was just so much fun, because if you didn't have a well-coordinated partnership or team, you would just end up with kind of QWOP levels of chaos. It's just such a fun game, and after all the weird stuff I'd been looking at, it was really refreshing to run across this. Another really interesting title I ran across was the Spectrum Retreat, which is a kind of a first-person puzzler. Seemed quite narrative-driven, or at least concerned with narrative, but the puzzles play a huge part in it as well. You have to use various means at your disposal to be able to progress, such as teleporting, manipulating gravity, transferring colours that you can walk through certain doors, and yeah, it was just really slick. There was something about it that felt slightly Portal-esque, as in the same vein, not ripping it off at all, and it just had a really interesting chilly atmosphere, with all the sort of mannequin staff just waiting around, quite eerie in a sense. Once again, absolutely worth keeping an eye on. And finally, Larkin Dance of Death, kind of a narrative-driven adventure game. I assume set in some sort of parallel timeline, because you essentially have the mysteries of Jack the Ripper being investigated by Sir Lancelot and Morgana Le Fay. So, fair play. It essentially strikes me as a bit of a descendant of the Telltale school of narrative gaming, where you wander around, you talk to people and pick conversational options and what have you. But it struck me as a game that, looked really nice, sounded really great, very, very polished, and the writing is very, very charming. And I can't see any reason why I won't give it a go when it comes out. Finally, I went to see a live recording of what I think we can all agree is one of the defining podcasts of our age, The Computer Game Show. Presented by David Turners, Sean Bell, Matt Murray and James Farley, but no John Denton, unfortunately. If you want to know what went on at this show, I can reel off a little list. There was, amongst other things, a live choking out of one of the members. There was news delivered specifically from the podium, and they made the most reluctant member, James Farley, run around with a microphone during the Q&A session. I didn't get to ask the question of what their wives thought of them doing this, but I'm pretty sure they weren't fussed. Anyway, go and check them out on spong.com. It's mental. Okay, that's it. Join me next week for, well, hopefully some updates on the game, because this week has been mental. Not least preparing for my first comedy open mic spot as Al Pachinko. So let's hope that's not a complete disaster. I'll see you next time.